Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm news editor Siobhan Holt, and today I'm joined by our UK editor John Harrington and senior reporter Evie Barrett. Hi both.
Hello.
Hi Siobhan.
Let's start with the global IT outage, which has been dominating the headlines in recent days. The outage, which has impacted Microsoft Windows devices, is linked to an update by cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. And as we all know, it's disrupted several UK businesses and been one of the biggest comms challenges so far of the year, would you say, guys?
Absolutely.
John, what sort of struck you about it all? How do you think the comms industry's handled it?
Well, I wonder if, first of all, we start with the organisation most directly related to it, with CrowdStrike itself and its own comms response. I've been having a look at the response and also the responses to the response. So I wanted to discuss that a bit, really, as we do in this podcast. Zoe Kleiman, the BBC's technology editor, made a point on LinkedIn that the one thing missing from CrowdStrike's statement initially was any hint of an apology. She said, perhaps a sign of awareness that this could prove to be an extremely expensive mistake as people miss flights, trains, hospital appointments on a summer Friday. But already there are rumblings of a backlash that the word sorry was notably absent from CEO George Kurtz's words. So I looked at the original statement and she is right. The CEO's message was factual and it updated everyone on how the team is, quote, actively working with customers and is fully mobilised and so on. It also emphasised that it's not a cyber attack, which I think is important because a lot of people were mentioning that at the start, and it's good to sort of put those rumours to bed. To be fair, a follow-up statement from Kurt said, "We understand the gravity of the situation and are deeply sorry for the inconvenience and disruption." I looked at CrowdStrike's X account, and it does have regular updates on what they've been doing. So in a way, I don't think we should be too harsh on CrowdStrike because it's a very difficult balance here. What do you both think of this response? Should the company and its CEO have said sorry right away, or are there other things to consider here?
I do slightly agree because my experience of it, because I was writing the story on the Friday morning, was that there wasn't much. I checked both the Twitter account for CrowdStrike and Microsoft, and at first I couldn't find much statements. It was only when the BBC published George Kurtz, CEO, retweeted it that I was able to sort of find a statement on it. But as you say, it was chaos, wasn't it? It was chaos at the start. So I think you can slightly understand that sort of reticence of putting information out there and wrong information. And I think maybe they were right that the first statement was sort of saying it wasn't a cyber attack. There was clarification on that. But I think there is a bit of controversy or debate going on about the fact that the second sort of comment from the company seems to have been an apology. What do you think, Evie? Do you think he was right to apologise?
I think so. I think it's the kind of thing that's affected so many people that it's almost like the least you can do is say, sorry, guys. I think you go a long way for kind of being open on these things and kind of admitting, yeah, we've made a mistake and we're working to fix it. I think people respect you a lot more for that kind of approach.
People often say that the difficulty with saying sorry is this almost could be seen as an admission of guilt. So if people seek compensation, then they could use it as evidence that you are effectively saying you're guilty. I've heard other comms professionals say that that's not really true. And actually, there is more of a common sense element to this. And obviously, you are sorry. If you're in his situation, you are sorry. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be paying everyone millions and billions of dollars. But I do think sometimes that is the problem with putting out a statement that says sorry straight away. And often it can be a structural problem in comms sometimes. If comms is so beholden to legal, sometimes this is something I hear sometimes from crisis comms professionals, that legal are much more conservative and concerned about, well, as you'd imagine, the kind of legal ramifications of things rather than what it seems like from a human point of view and from a reputational point of view. So that can sometimes be a tension. And I feel that maybe that was an initial concern. And perhaps later on, maybe they had advice that said, actually, it's okay to say sorry. It doesn't necessarily mean we're admitting that we're going to be, sort of directly liable for the fact that your planes aren't running or whatever it might be. Obviously, maybe they were. Those cases will undoubtedly sort of continue. But yeah, I feel that is an important consideration, really. And it's something that, our crisis comms conference that we had last month, you'll always get these kind of issues cropping up. But I do think how and whether to say sorry is always an important consideration for crisis comms pros, really.
I spoke to some comms pros who've been dealing with the issue at their own companies and looking at what they've learnt from it. One firm, which I think was one of the first to put a post out on the whole situation, was the National Pharmacy Association. So I chatted with Nick Parker Sutton, who is the senior press officer there, and he spoke about how they were really keen to get on the front foot with their comms in order to reassure their members and to warn prospective patients that essentially everyone was trying their best, but things might be a little bit up in the air. As a trade body, they were especially wary of keeping journalists up to date too. They felt that it was sort of their responsibility to act as an authority on the sector. One thing Nick said is that he realised there's a lot of power and influence in PA media because a lot of journalists go there for copy straight away when a big story breaks. So I guess that's something to keep in mind during a time of crisis. The National Pharmacy Association also made sure that it prepped senior spokespeople for media interviews and noted that it's really important to make sure you got people who are comfortable speaking publicly because for them, for the most part, they are dealing with medical professionals and not people who've been media trained. So you have to sort of be careful who you're putting out there. Overall, the key bit of advice that Nick gave was, quote, "You can't ever predict in this line of work exactly what's going to happen on any given day. The ability to quickly reallocate your time and resources to focus on one significant thing is important, and that ability to not be nervous to move at pace, because in these situations we needed to be able to get a line out quickly." He strongly advised this over kind of leaving a vacuum of information and letting things sit for a bit.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? That idea of having a crisis comms plan that people always talk about, I think is really crucial. And this sort of shows that that's the case. And also that idea of not saying anything. And that's when, particularly in the days of misinformation and disinformation and even sort of AI-enabled fakery, I think that's more important than ever.
I was quite impressed actually by Manchester Airport's updates. They were giving very regular updates to passengers because obviously last Friday was quite a big day for travel in the UK. So I think the fact that they jumped on it was really important and that they were giving those regular bouts of information, not just on the airport, but also saying that, you know, you'll need to check your train times as well, that's been impacted. So they really looked at the broader comms aspect of it, I thought, which was quite impressive. Was there anyone else that faced challenges, Evie?
Kind of linking back to John's point about how you can see it as easier to just not say anything. One I thought was interesting was I spoke to Kira O'Sullivan, who's head of communications at Kew Gardens, and she said they weren't too affected by it. There was a brief time during the day when they couldn't accept card payments at gates, car parks or shops on site. And even though they didn't get any press inquiries around this, they still were quick to post an update on their website to notify customers and also ask their ticket handlers to contact visitors who'd booked tickets so that they could let them know they'd need to bring cash. And I thought that was quite a strong approach because it shows that even if you're not dealing with a big reputational crisis as such, it still pays to be vocal and transparent and keep the people you're dealing with up to date where you can.
Yeah, I think it's kind of safety first approach, isn't it, really? It's kind of saying, okay, it doesn't seem to be too bad at the moment, but almost you'd rather give people too much information and be too prepared than, you know, leave things to chance.
Although I guess in this case it's easier to do that because the issue was out of their control. It was a third party issue rather than anything that people could potentially blame them for.
Yeah.
So John, what are other crisis comms experts saying about this?
Well, we've spoken to quite a few people. There's an interesting article actually from Campaign Asia that we took across with some good comments. Jose Raymond, who's MD of the agency SW Strategies, made a really important point that in a crisis, customers do not care who is at fault. I'd say, well, yes, it's fine to say a problem is caused by this thing beyond our control. At that moment in time, customers simply want to know what you're going to be doing about it and how long it will be before the problems are fixed. So, yeah, good point there. But also some interesting data in the article from Karma, which found that Changi Airport in Singapore managed to maintain 50.7% positive online reactions during the crisis, which is way ahead of most airports. People were praising the airport's ground staff for their efficiency and calmness during the disruption. Devika Jesmal, who's head of marketing Asia at Karma, made the important point that companies with a strong positive reputation year-round can recover more quickly from crises. She said, in the case of Changi Airport, their reputation for excellent customer service enabled effective crisis mitigation and recovery. And again, this is something that we do here at our Crisis Comms conference, and otherwise talking to experts in this field. That sense of, if you build up a positive reputation and people are minded to view you positively throughout the year, it can really be at your advantage when a crisis hits. I think this crisis could even be a watershed moment when it comes to what customers expect, not only from their company, but also the companies that supply them. Because let's face it, if you're booking a flight, you're just thinking of the airline and maybe the airport. You're not really thinking of the companies that do the computer systems or the cybersecurity systems or fuel the airlines or anything like that. But there's a real sense that a company that most people probably never heard of have now been one of the most high-profile companies in the world for the last few days. There's an interesting comment here. Asiya Bhatt, founder of Beats Public Relations, made the point that, quote, "We're likely to see future consumers demand greater accountability and transparency, even when it comes to companies outsourcing their services." So I think that's a really important point too. Any other thoughts on other lessons from this crisis?
Yeah, I agree, John. I spoke to some crisis comm consultants in the sector, like Amanda Coleman, and she sort of said very similar points, really. She argued that it's important that businesses are prepared for these problems and that they understand what aspects of their work are critical. She said that comms people need to be honest, explain what is happening, and give people regular updates, and that they shouldn't try to hide, blame, or downplay the situation. Moving on, there's been big news regarding B Corp and Havas last week. John, can you explain?
Yes, so B Lab, which runs B Corp, the certification scheme for ethical businesses, revoked the B Corp status of 4 Havas agencies last week following an investigation. It means all Havas entities will also be ineligible to be certified now. Now, this follows an investigation after several groups, including Clean Creatives, complained to B Lab after the group won Shell's global B2B media account last year. Suspension with remediation, i.e. taking certain actions, would be required for Havas to maintain its certification, but Havas was unwilling to adopt the actions. Havas released a statement, which I'll discuss briefly. It said it had cooperated in good faith throughout the investigation, while simultaneously preserving the integrity of confidential client information. Havas said its level of commitment towards sustainability remains unchanged, pointing to its receipt of the gold medal by EcoVadis for business sustainability. Havas said, quote, "We are proud to support our clients in their transformation for the future and remain focused on progressing towards the highest levels of social and environmental performance, with more to come in the coming months and years." Now, a key element here, B Lab said that as a result of the decision, it will change its current standards to include, quote, "rigorous due diligence requirements for human rights and environmental impact." B Lab aren't saying any more at the moment. We think it will take a couple of months probably to change those standards. I'd be surprised if any agency or holding company that works with fossil fuel companies would now be able to become a B Corp, but I might be wrong. I mean, I strongly suspect agencies and groups with big oil clients simply won't apply to be B Corps, but it's a comms challenge for sure for agencies that work with such clients. I think the onus has really shifted very heavily on agencies in their work with fossil fuel companies to prove they are part of the solution to the climate crisis, not just say they can be. I think there's been a bit of a flip there. It follows, of course, Clean Creatives' sustained campaigns by others. And earlier this year, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres really blasted PR and ad agencies for working with big oil. So the heat is really on. So obviously a significant ruling. Siobhan, you've been talking to some bosses of other PR agencies that are B Corps themselves. What have they been saying?
Yes, John. So we spoke to some of the bosses at agencies, including Manifest, Milk and Honey, and Alfred. Overall, most of them, when we asked for comments, said that they were quite welcoming of this news. But Arlo Brady, CEO at Freud's, in a post on social, he said it will be very interesting to see the reaction of the wider marketing and comms world in the coming days, and asked what does this mean for where the line is drawn and what's acceptable and what's not going forward. And that is what stood out to me, actually. Oil isn't the only controversial part of the sector. There are others, tobacco being one example. So, some people have an issue with vaping. I'm interested into where B Corp are going to end up putting their ethical line, so to speak, going forward. People are going to have problems with different sectors and how you define that. Would you agree, Evie?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of nuances to this. I think what stands out to me is also the fact that all Havas entities can't certify as B Corps now. I think when you look at the broader kind of comms landscape, all the M&A and things like that that's going on, I think it is going to pose problems for the holding companies or the agencies that are part of holding companies that want to become B Corps, because you've then got to judge the whole of your company by the same standards. It's only going to get trickier as these agencies get bigger.
I think that's true. I wonder if Havas is slightly different to most because they're branded Havas, aren't they? If you take a WPP or an Omnicom, most of these agencies don't have WPP or Omnicom, for example, and I could have chosen lots of other holding companies. They don't have those names in the title very often. So does that make a difference? And also, let's say you're owned by private equity. If your private equity owner also has some interest in fossil fuel companies or other controversial industries, does that mean that you're implicated in this as well? It does pose a lot of questions, and I expect that B Labs knows that this isn't going to be the end of this by a long shot. But I do also think it probably felt like it had to do something, because I do sense quite a lot of frustration about Havas from other B Corp agencies and others in the industry for some time. So they've probably kind of done the right thing in terms of their own reputation at the moment to show that they are acting and they are listening to the other B Corp members. But you're right, it's not without its problems. And in a way, it gets to the heart of a lot of the ethical issues around comms more generally, we've spoken about before at length. Where are the lines? What if you work for a company that uses a lot of fossil fuels, whether it's transport, whether it's, you mentioned the kind of classic sin industries, tobacco, so on, certain types of production of FMCG and all of that sort of thing. You could go on for a long time, and it feels like these are sort of well-rehearsed arguments, but I kind of feel sorry for B Corp in a way with its comms challenge now, because you're right, it has sort of set down a bit of a marker. So we'll have to live up to that in the months and years ahead. But I also think it's inevitable. It shows that things aren't necessarily massively straightforward, but we'll watch with interest.
And it's quite a timely announcement from B Labs, really. I mean, we had the story last week where Clean Creatives called out a few comms agencies for working with fossil fuel clients and faced backlash from the agencies themselves, saying that it was basically more of a nuanced issue than Clean Creatives was making it out to be. The letter was called factually incorrect by a couple of agencies. So I think there's going to be a bit of back and forth between kind of the two sides, and it's really down to B Labs to kind of draw the line and say what's what.
Well, I think one thing's for certain, there's going to be some twists and turns on this over the next few months, so I think stay tuned, and PR Week will definitely be bringing you the news on that. That's all we have time for today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review wherever you access PR Week's podcast. Thanks to Evie and John, and thanks to you for listening. Bye for now.